Immanuel Kant, an Enlightenment philosopher, argued that every thought we have originated from somewhere else. Most messages we receive about ethnicity and race come from our environment, specifically social media. Media is our mainstream of information, and it can easily spread explicit and implicit bias to its viewers. Explicit bias is a traditional concept of bias. With explicit bias, individuals are aware of their prejudices and attitudes towards certain groups. We use the term implicit bias to describe when we have attitudes towards people or associate stereotypes to them without our conscious knowledge. A common example of this has been seen in studies that show that white people will frequently associate criminality and violence with black men without even realizing they are doing it. This is an image that became very popularized during the Black Lives Matter movement. The Black Lives Matter protest began in June of 2021 after the death of George Floyd. The mission of the Black Lives Matter movement is to create a global network that brings power, justice, healing, and freedom to Black people across the globe. The Black Lives Matter protest became known as a story told through photos and media. Depending upon which media post filled your newsfeed, the protest looked extremely different to the audience. My chosen topic for my image is cultural stereotypes. Media creates meaning about race and ethnicity and plays an important role in shaping the way we understand race and ethnicity as part of our identity, our history, and our social institutions in our everyday lives. Often used interchangeably, race is a way of classifying individuals and groups on the bias of physical characteristics. Depending on your skin color, ethnic background, where you grew up, what kind of people you've encountered, you will have your own experience and idea of what race and ethnicity means. This may also lead to the development of your own implicit or explicit bias or your own creation of stereotypes about other races and cultures. Historically, cultural stereotypes about non-whites were shaped by the ideas and values influenced by Western Europeans used as a justification for colonialism. The Western Europeans created racial constructs to socially, politically, and economically oppress non-whites. Western Europeans used the ideology that non-whites were inferior because of their skin color, different cultural beliefs, and were deemed as evil, primitive, or backward. Even though this is not true, the Europeans used this justification to enslave and oppress non-whites. However, these racist ideologies are still extremely evident in the world that we live in today. I selected this image to show the implicit bias of the media used during the BLM protests. This image is one of the famous images that surfaced during the protests when many media sites wanted to depict the BLM protests as being chaotic, unsafe, and violent. However, these media sites chose to ignore the fact that majority of BLM protests were overwhelmingly peaceful. When initially looking at this image, yes, it does portray chaos and violence. When taking a deeper dive into this, it's a prime example of implicit bias during the protests. The people in this photo are young black men, and it's alluding to the stereotypes that black men are criminal and violent. The purpose of this photo becoming popularized had a hidden agenda to show viewers that the BLM protesters were inciting riots and crime. But this image only represents a small percentage of what was really happening. It overlooks the fact that during the BLM movement, there were many organized, meaningful, and intentional actions occurring. The purpose of this image was attempting to show that the BLM protests were a danger to our society, which was not the case. This was just used to stereotype and show that these black males were being destructive and carrying out violence during the BLM protest. This image also can be interpreted as upholding stereotypical views from a historical perspective because it connects back to the notion of the racist ideologies once created by Western Europeans, that non-whites are viewed as barbaric and uncivilized. And I feel as if the message in this image is what the photographer was trying to conceptualize. Even though it was very clear and known that white people did participate in rioting and events like these were not images that made it to the social media. That's why this image embodies both explicit and implicit bias because it's upholding stereotypes and ideas and beliefs about the Black community that are preconceived notions.